I'm Marna Cornell, and I am president of this very, very wonderful organization. It humbles me that I have this honor, and it's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to serve you for almost 3 years. I wanted to just make a few announcements after welcoming everyone, a warm welcome. Know that we are delighted that you came, and what it says to us is you are people who are interested in being informed. You are people who are interested in being educated on current issues of the day, and certainly the press is one of them. And as I like to say, it's the people who show up who run the world. So thank you for showing up. All right, just a few announcements about upcoming events for us. And flyers are back on the piano, which has a white tablecloth, and it's just back there. We are co-sponsors of a pro-con forum on this coming Monday, March 9th, in the evening on the 7:10. You're going to have both sides of it. It's moderated by the executive director of the Pat Brown Institute, and the league is going to be there to help with question sorting, get people into their seats. It's not a political rally, so, but we'd love to get a good turnout on that. And just a little bit of background, it was expected an environmental report would be out, and that's why they picked this date, but it didn't come out. It was due in February, so they're hoping that this will put pressure on people who are working on that to get that out, because that's important. So, how you have to register for it, and then it gives you parking instructions, so please take a flyer. The next thing on my list is that we are having a climate change forum that's put on by our wonderful Natural Resources Committee, and that's on a Saturday, March 21st. And flyers for that are also on the piano. We do not charge for our events, and they are also on the table. The restrooms are through the double door back there. And there is one more event that we are co-sponsoring I want to mention, is the National Women's Political Caucus is doing a training of how to get appointed to a public board or commission. It's going to be in the evening of March 31st. It will be in Altadena. And I believe, Marguerite, there are flyers back on the piano?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Marguerite, stand, if you could just raise your hand. She's the engine behind this. So go see her. She's the go-to person. It's going to be a wonderful thing. We need to get more women involved. And so you have to start at all kinds of levels. So get the information and then strong arm your grandchildren. All right. We have some new members here, and so I would appreciate it at every table. A member of the league would be sure that people get introduced to the new members as well as to our guests. Now, for everyone, the Women's City microphone, which I am using, the panel will be using, Monica will be using, it gets very temperamental when cell phones are on. So if you could all not even put them on vibrate, just turn them off. Give yourself a cell phone free zone. And one other thing about the parking. If you had problems parking, I don't know what the situation is out there, and we are only, if this parking lot is full, we can go across the street, but it must be on the south side of the building across the street. If not, you will get a ticket, and we will get a bad girl lecture. So, please, please, follow the rules. Thank you. All right, now I'm turning it over to Monica Hubbard, who is going to do the introductions and get us off and running. Thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Marna.
Thank you all for being here this morning. When the events committee met last fall to begin planning the league programs for the year, we decided that since Sunshine Week occurred during March, we would focus on open government, the public's right to know, and the challenges ordinary citizens like us have getting timely, factual information. Little did we know that current events here in Pasadena and elsewhere would bring this issue into such sharp relief. Our initial intent was to assemble a panel of all investigative reporters, kind of a dying breed of journalists. However, when I spoke with Karen Foshay, who was then the senior investigative producer at KPCC, she suggested that it might be interesting to come at the topic from a variety of perspectives. Perspectives that would include both government communications professionals as well as those investigating and reporting on government. The end result of that conversation is the stellar panel of award-winning communications professionals who are with us this morning. We put their bios on the table for you so that you could see all the wonderful and amazing things that they are doing. And I hope that you've all had a chance to take a look at those. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator for this morning's panel, a woman who probably needs no introduction at all, to those of us at least in Southern California, the Vice President of News and Public Affairs at KCET and anchor of SoCal Connected, Val Zavala.
Now we're going to share this mic, and I don't want you to be excluded. I don't know if it's possible to move this. Can we just push it back? So that
We're fine.
Okay.
Oh, was it?
You're fine. We're going to move it. This is I'm in producer mode. Because I need to see the word. Great. Okay, thank you so much for having us here. It's going to be a terrific panel. And I've been at KCT now, I hate to admit it, but it's been for 28 years. And that's a testament to the fact it's public television, which forgives you for bad hair days and not being perfect all the time and you actually get old and all that kind of stuff. But I also I'm not going to go into that because I really want to spend as much time as possible at the panel, but I will set it up like this, and that is, yes, you all know journalism is really changing, and the trends are multiple and complex, and some are good and some are bad, and everyone's trying to figure out, but believe me, nobody has an overarching theory or description or prediction as to where the media is going. So I'm just going to throw out some trends that I've seen, which I'm sure you have all experienced in your daily lives. If there's one thing that people know, it's media, because we are all consumers of media. You don't have to be an expert to have an opinion on media. It's part of our lives. One, as we know, is fragmentation. It used to be the 3 networks with, Cronkite and Rather and Frank Reynolds and Jennings. They commanded huge portions of the viewership. So everyone had a common body of knowledge to draw from. You could say that's bad because the 3 networks had more control of what the content was, but everyone had a common sense of where the country was going, what was happening. That's not happening now. Everything is fragmented, there's niche, people are being their own curators, you've heard that a lot. And so big stories, it's amazing. The story about the LA County Fire Department and the cheating scandal and the hiring nepotism and all this, which I thought was a big story. My husband didn't know about it. I said, don't you even read the LA Times online a little bit? So it's very, very frustrating because we don't have that commonality anymore. At the same time, there's a lot more stuff. It's all niche, and we can get our little interests fulfilled, and we can, keep in touch with our little group and so forth. But on the other hand, we're losing that sense of commonality. The other problem, as we know, is newspapers are shrinking. And they just don't have the money they used to, they don't have the staff they used to, so even though the LA Times still has about, 900 reporters, that's probably half of what they had 10 or 15 years ago. And regardless of what everybody says, newspapers are the foundation for what a lot of other TV stations, radio stations draw from. Because even though KPCC and some of the TV stations have decent-sized staff, nobody has enough people to send and have them sit in a often boring council meeting for 6 hours unless that is your beat. So the newspapers are the boots on the ground. And the fact that they are now shrinking, they have been shrinking for a long, long time, has a ripple effect throughout the entire media. There's no question about it, because let's face it, we all know we just often just steal the story from the headline. So that's another important change. TV news has really taken, especially local TV news, I don't know, I simply don't watch anymore, it's not that relevant. And what I like to tell people, if I can give a little media literacy, little mini media literacy class here, next time you do watch local news, you probably just watch it for the weather, especially at the 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, watch carefully. How many stories were actually shot by one of their camera people going out to community and coming back with a story? More and more and more is this surveillance, grave surveillance video from some liquor store that got ripped off. They didn't shoot that. Sometimes it's graphics that they produce, some person produced in the newsroom. Nobody went to the scene of anything. Sometimes it's a national story, so they get the feed from their network. They didn't shoot that. Sometimes it's web video and Facebook video and all this. They didn't shoot that. So the number of reporters, even in television, who are into communities and are turning around stories like we used to, it just doesn't happen anymore. So watch your TV news, how little is actually produced by people in that newsroom where they send out a crew of reporters to a particular neighborhood. And when they do, and the other source is stringers, the people who shoot the accidents and the crimes overnight, they didn't shoot that. So despite the fact that, and then we've got Skype, and then we've got, and then they ask you to send in footage, because guess what? If you send in your footage, it saves them a whole lot of money, sending a crew there. So television news, despite the fact we have this incredible news gathering infrastructure and cameras and satellite feeds and whatnot, is doing less and less and less actual reporting on the ground. So those are some of the things that I've noticed. There's a lot more I can say, but I want to turn to our panel because they have really great insights into what's going on in the world. I want to start, if I could, with, if I can play a little bit of favorites with Karen Foshay. She's the one that kind of got us all here, I guess. I have had the pleasure of working with Karen. She's a superb, multi-award-winning investigative producer, recently joined Al Jazeera News Network, came from KPCC, was at SoCal Connected, where she won, literally it was because of her that won the DuPont and Peabody Awards. She has looked into HACLA, which is the housing authority, and found all sorts of extravagant spending on the top echelon of the executives, and some of them had to leave as a result. She looked at billboards and also electronic billboards and how the billboard companies pretty much rule the city council and get their way, and if they don't, they always file lawsuits and tend to win. She was the one who discovered that there were more pot clinics in Los Angeles than Starbucks. And it was a line that was, this was before the whole issue with too many pot clinics have taken over Los Angeles. She's the one that pretty much revealed that. So single-handedly. So she's done great work, and I'm going to toss it to her. And I want to just set her up a little bit. One of the things that Karen does so well is she knows how to use the system to get documents, and documents are the heart and soul and the basis of investigative reporting. And so she's an expert on that. Maybe you can give us a little idea of how you go about that and what's involved in getting them. I launched into a question. Should I introduce everyone else first?
Yeah.
Yes, I will do it. Then we'll do it. Also with us is Ann Erdman. She has decades experience in advertising, public relations, media, and communication strategies. She's been in San Diego, the Bay Area, and Palm Springs as a private sector advertising public relations agencies. And she began a 21-year career as public information officer of the city of Pasadena right here. Did you really retire? Right? Did you really retire? Wow.
I did.
Oh my God, you like the thing. Wow, 3 years ago. So now she is a private or consultant community volunteer, posting regular on a blog. Ann erdmanblogspot.com. Oh, good, you can talk about blogging. That would be terrific. Also with us is Noelia Rodriguez. Noelia is Chief Communications Officer for Metro, a huge organization. She can tell us some of the challenges of that. She joined 1.5 years ago. Previously, she was director of the prestigious John F. Kennedy Forum of Harvard University for political speech and debate, so she knows a lot about politics and the press. She began her corporate communications career at Southern California Edison. She entered the world of politics in 1994 when she's drafted by Mayor Richard Rear to serve as press secretary. You're promoted to deputy mayor, and then she actually went on to Washington and served in First Lady Laura Bush's House Press Secretary for a while, Director of Communications. I'm sure that was an interesting experience, which you probably can't tell us too much about. Oh, are you? Excellent. And I love this. If you didn't read her bio, I have to read this part. Though she's a native Texan, Noelia is still searching for the perfect pair of cowboy boots, preferably with the perfect cowboy in them. Honestly, not many candidates in this particular form. And rounding out our panel is Carrie Stockstead. Did I say that right, Carrie?
Yeah.
Stockstead. She has been Executive Director and CEO for Pasadena Media for the city of Pasadena since, 3 years ago. And it's a nonprofit operating company of the city overseeing 4 PEGs. PEGs stand for Public Education and Government Channels serving Pasadena. For more than 20 years, Ms. Stockstead has been a tireless advocate on the national and local levels for free speech, community media, open government, and community access and cable television programming. In Pasadena, she's responsible for 16 people and $1.2 million annual budget, working with dozens of regional TV producers, community partners, civic leaders, to generate original local broadcast programming, online and social media. She recently directed the construction of Pasadena's media's first new 6,000 square foot all-digital TV studio and media training facility. Wow, that's fantastic. So thank you all for being here, and now I'll go back to my original question with Karen. Karen, what is involved with getting important documents that serve as a foundation for investigative reports?
First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Monica, for inviting me. How do you get records? Well, I have no special rights. I mean, we all have the same right. You do have a right to the same records, I'm asking for. The first step is really just finding the person that is in charge of the records, and that can take 3 hours, sometimes, depending on what agency it is. And I think that the key is really being persistent. All the stories that Val mentioned were all tips I got, or sometimes I was just looking through public records. The City of Los Angeles actually has a really great website. It's really easy to find records. It's all online, and I love it. And I ended up doing a lot of stories on the City of LA because I could access their records. Not the case with the Board of Supervisors. Go try to find something on their website, and it is impossible. It's to the point where the average Joe, I think, can just give up and say, this is a nightmare. I can't even find the right department. I don't know where it is on the website. So it really depends on the agency. Some are much more with it than others. What I have seen, and there's usually 2 obstacles to getting the records. A is finding a public information officer that's willing to cooperate with you. I find many times they are, sometimes not. But then you have to get the records. You have to know what you're asking for. So if you can always get an insider who says, make sure you ask for the XYZ form. But even just as an average citizen, knowing what you're looking for really, really helps. But assuming you find somebody who's willing to give you those records, then you've got to pay for them. And I have seen a huge problem, an uptick in the past year, I would say. And I've talked to other reporters up and down the state with charging. For example, I just tried to get some records out of the California Highway Patrol. Records that I know they gave another reporter in Sacramento, so there's a pile of them somewhere. They wanted to charge me $6,000 for them. So that is becoming standard. I had a fight with Cal OSHA yesterday, and they wanted to charge me for electronic files, these are a PDF he had on his desk, on his desktop, that could have emailed me. I have to send a check for $16 first to get them. So what we're finding, and I can afford the $16, but it's a hassle. You have to send the check in, and then you have to wait. And I said, but they're right there. Can't you just, these are public records. So we're finding a huge problem with this, and that is a big obstacle, is the amount that they want to change. And it all depends. The city of Los Angeles I find to be very easy to work with, believe it or not, except for building and safety. I don't care what you're asking for, it's gonna be $800. It's always $800, whatever you ask for. And what we're finding is they're now charging for, you know, Susie to walk across the hall to then get the copy and then put it through here. So we're sometimes being charged $30, $40 an hour to get the records. And then once you get the records, it's 10, 25 cents a page. So for many news organizations, they just can't afford it, let alone the citizen. You can't afford $5,000 to pay the CHP. And so that's where I see the biggest problem right now. There are two obstacles, finding them and then paying for them.
Could you pass it to Ann? Ann, I'd love for you to comment, because you have worked with City of Pasadena. Pasadena is now having a few little ethical challenges.
What? First of all, it's really surprising and shocking to me whenever I hear that kind of a story, that a public agency is charging outrageous fees for public records. The California Public Records Act, which is in the California Code, state law, specifies that an agency can indeed charge for copies, for hard copies. But charging for electronic files and charging to have Susie walk across the hall, that's in violation, sorry everybody, that's in violation of the California Public Records Act. Period, the end, that's it. Also, the California Public Records Act requires that an agency must assist a requester in really honing down to the type of specific record that they're asking for. So for example, many times when I was the Pasadena PIO, Public Information Officer, which really is PR Director, but it's a government classification, many times I would, either from perhaps an attorney or a constituent or a reporter, receive a request for a public record, but it was so broad, the request, that it would take a year to try and fulfill that request. And so I was always cognizant of that rule in the California Public Records Act, that it is required for a public agency to talk the person through that and assist them to get specifically what it is that they need. For the most part, generally, the business of public agencies, governments, is public record. Whether anybody likes that, whether anybody within those agencies likes that or not. The business of government is, for the most part, public record. In California, the California Public Records Act, and federally, the Freedom of Information Act, allows for certain exemptions, but they have to be, those exemptions must be very, very carefully weighed against the public's right to know. I won't go through the whole list of exemptions, but one of them, for example, is investigatory records. If there's an ongoing investigation, that investigation is not yet complete, that investigation is still ongoing, then those investigatory records are not necessarily public record quite yet. So, for example, the embezzlement, allegedly, of $6.4 million from the undergrounding of utilities fund in Pasadena. One of the big ticket items of the day right now has been, why wasn't the report from KPMG, the big accounting firm, why was that not made public sooner than it was? And the answer to that is that per the California Public Records Act, this was an investigatory record that went along with and was part of the LA County District Attorney's Office investigation and the building of its case against Mr. Wooten and others. And so it could not be released until their investigation was complete, their ducks were in a row, so that they could arrest these alleged felons and start the process of putting them away and making them pay for their injustices. So hopefully that answers some of those questions.
Noelle, I'd love for you to address, okay. Noelle, why don't you address some of the challenges you've had? Because from a government point of view, you know, and Metro is that's a big horse to handle. There are times, I'm sure, when it would be, you can do your job better without the press getting in the way. But at the same time, so give us a balance.
Oh, thanks, Val. It's a very good question, and before I get into that, I want to say a couple of things. One is I'd like to thank Monica and the League for having us here today and including me in this important conversation. I think it's so timely given some of the things that maybe on a federal level we can talk about, like Hillary Clinton's emails as a topic, transparency. But secondly, I think you'll be all pleased to know, and I think Marna, thanks to your pressure, where's Marna? I'll let you know. Thanks to your pressure in your comments, I've gotten an email from my office. I actually sent an inquiry about what's going on about the 710 North study, and it's going to be released tomorrow. So you will have some weekend reading to do, and so stay tuned for that. And it'll be just in time for your event next week. And also, I want to also do a commercial for Metro that. I have to because I have the microphone. But Caltrans is the issuing body, but we're their partner in this. Over the last year or so since I've been there, we've had a lot of requests to have the review period, the public comment period, go from the compulsory 30 days. So we actually asked for more. When we got 45 days in agreement, and yesterday or earlier today, we got confirmation that we're going to have a 120-day review period. So that's good news, and that's thanks to the comments from we've had from people in this community. Also, Chris Holden and Karen Lou have been very representative of this organization and others to get that extended. So it's good news to have as much access as possible to the comment of transparency. So stay tuned for the release tomorrow. So to the question of being able to do our jobs better, you know, before coming to here today, I actually was talking to our media relations director. He reports to me, and we talked a little bit about Freedom of Information Act requests. He's really the expert for our agency. But I was really surprised to learn that in the last year, we've had at Metro about 30 FOIA requests. And they range from everything from salaries for employees to ridership numbers to rate increase, you know, background data. So it runs the gamut. And what I found interesting about this, and I was talking to him yesterday, is that when I was a press secretary and a director of communications at City Hall in the 90s, I can remember 2 times in my 7 years where two reporters, they were LA Times investigative reporters, who came to me as part of their investigation, related to the fire department, FOIA requests. So to go from that, which I think back then, to Val's point earlier, it's all different now, because back then there was the social media, you know, universe did not exist, and so we were really very relationship oriented. And I always had the attitude with reporters, and I still do, that I have a job to do, but they also have a job to do, and we have a mutual audience that we need to reach and want to reach as effectively as possible. So why not, to the furthest extent possible, be partners in that mission? I mean, you're not, for example, as somebody was saying, you know, there's an investigation, you can't really go into all those details because there's an investigation. You have a duty to the process to let it play out for the people that are involved. And that includes the ratepayers or the taxpayers or whatever the body is or constituency. And that doesn't exist anymore because we don't have 5 o'clock deadlines. You don't have the ability to say, look, here's the movie for the background and have a relationship and trust that that background is going to go into making of that story. Whether you like the story or not, that doesn't matter. The facts are going to be there, and that's what you, at the end of the day, as a spokesperson or a PIO or a press secretary, as long as the facts are there. And there's nothing that irks me more than to have something that just doesn't jive with what the facts are, especially after I've spent the time, or somebody on my staff has spent the time to inform a reporter about the facts, because we all have, you know, pressing issues on the other side of that phone. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but I do want to say that as everything is a public document, and so we have to be very responsible with that duty, because we want to make sure that the public has the information in a timely fashion, but it also has to be accurate, and it has to be forthcoming to the best extent possible. You can't just give it to that board member and not the others. You have to give it to everybody, because they all have equal constituencies that deserve the information, and that's how we try to operate in my organization.
Right. And Carrie, I'd love to hear from you, because you are really in touch with more a grassroots journalistic efforts.
Right.
I don't know if it's a movement or what you might call it, but I would love to know what is happening from your perspective. Do you see interest coming up, bubbling up? Do you find there is talent there? Do people realize, oh gee, I want to be a citizen journalist, and then 6 months later, oh gee, this is too hard, I can't, or just what's going on, what's happening at this new facility also?
Thank you. I would offer that at Pasadena Media we do teach classes in video production, and we actually do train people in camera techniques and such. And it's really good for people to come into the studio to learn those things. But what I was going to sort of bounce off of in terms of this particular topic was that, Karen, everybody might be a little intimidated in terms of, Karen being able to dive in and be able to get this information, but I think you made a really great point, which is everyone is a citizen journalist if you choose to be. And we all have that inquisitive nature about us that says, hey, there's something about this that I want to know more about. I want to understand. And one of the questions in preparation for this morning we were asked is, how do we get our news? And I feel like the best way to get our news is to find many places to get your news and really research the topic, and not just figure that you're going to get your news from one type of medium or one distribution method. Like, some people say, oh, I'm going to get all my news from TV, or I'm going to get all my news from the internet. Please don't get all of your news from the internet. And to consider yourself as a citizen journalist, somebody who wants to know more information, and it's absolutely true that you can call your city, public information officer. And I was actually fortunate enough that Ann and I overlapped for about 4 months, I believe, and Ann was actually on my board of directors at Pasadena Media for a period of time as the city appointee. So I was fortunate enough to be able to get to know Ann a little bit through that time together. But working now with the current public information officer as a part of the government access channel, we do a lot of coverage of government meetings. I'm one of those sort of odd people that actually likes government, local government, city council meetings. I think that we have so many things that are being decided, so much goes on in those discussions, especially in terms of Pasadena. People are very passionate about this community. They're very passionate about what's happening and very interested. And I think, in terms of just getting back to that particular point, asking questions is a part of what makes us very passionate about our community, wondering what's happening and reaching out to the city and saying, we need answers to these questions, both of things that are currently happening, and also just, what is the plan for the next 4 years or 10 years for our community. So as a part of what I do at Pasadena Media is I encourage people to come in and ask those questions and use the medium of television to do that.
If I may just add, with several of my stories, I swear this is true of almost every story I've done, and especially at SoCal Connected, there's always somebody in the community who's been watching, who's been at the city council meeting, who's taken it upon themselves to take on the billboard industry or the FEMA flood problems. Every one of my stores has had somebody. And they have saved me a lot of time because they've gone and found the public records, you know? And so, you know, again, I'm nothing special here. You can go and do it too. You know, it may take you a little bit longer, but you can do it. And then you call me and you say, guess what, Karen? You're not gonna believe what I just found, and I have the records to prove it. Every story seems to have a crusader in one of mine, and I'll always find somebody. There's always that person who's, you know, got a bugaboo about something, and they're at the city council, and they're really important, because the reality is, even at KPCC, we had a city hall reporter, Alice Walton, was there. Now she's jumped to the LA Times, so KPCC no longer has a city hall reporter. There are now 2 reporters, as I understand it, covering city hall. LA, the second largest city in America. Chicago has like 15. We just don't cover it, and honestly, we rely on citizens who are sitting in the chambers, listening, and then call us and say, you're not gonna believe what they just voted on. I'm not happy about that. We should be there. We should be at those meetings, but the reality is, we're all stretched so thin in this industry.
At the
So
same
you
time,
play
I
an
wanna-
important role.
Right. Also,
Although at the same time, I want to say it can also be it's very important, these citizen journalists who are on the ground level, but it's also frustrating for them because the Bell story, and with Rizzo and the massive exploitation and just basically the raiding of the Treasury, there was a local Bell citizen who was on this for a long time and could not get any attention, and had I think some little reporting and whatnot going on. And it wasn't until the LA Times, the big guys came in, that the story blew up. So yes, you can be local, you can be doing your little thing, but in the end, you still sort of need those crusaders on the ground, needed a Karen, needed a KPCC, needed a SoCal Connect to come on and be a megaphone for their story. So would love some other thoughts. And have you dealt with investigating at all, or anything else you'd like to say about what you see the media is going in the direction?
I always loved working with investigative reporters. It was really fun. It was really fun because not only did it provide me, via the city of Pasadena, an opportunity to provide information and provide clarification, which in my mind is critically important, but also it was always kind of fun to spar with investigative reporters from time to time. What has changed the landscape a little, let's say, is the whole issue, or I shouldn't say issue, the whole phenomenon of citizen reporters. I love the idea of citizen reporters. I wish that we had more citizen reporters in Pasadena. There are plenty of bloggers, but they're not necessarily citizen reporters, and there's a big distinction there. It's a big distinction between, here's my recipe for chicken that I made up last night, and here's where I walked my dog, and here's a photo of it. On blogs, there's a big distinction between that and actually reporting from a citizen's perspective on the current issues of the day. So we don't currently have any citizen reporter blogs. What we do have, however, and this is certainly not distinctive only to Pasadena, is that we have plenty of gadflies, which has always been the case, as well as the obligatory conspiracy theorists, and that has always been the case as well. And so, and now throw that into the mix with social media, blogs, Facebook, Twitter, etc., YouTube, and you have people who perhaps really do believe in their heart of hearts that everybody is corrupt and everybody is evil no matter what. But you also have news consumers, like you and I, who, if we don't do our own homework and our own due diligence on a particular issue, then there are a lot of news consumers who just believe what people put on Facebook and Twitter and on blogs and whatnot, comments to online news stories. Just take that as fact. And it's a very slippery slope. I find myself as the now retired PIO for the city of Pasadena, when it comes to Pasadena issues, because I still have my ear to the ground, and I know people, I find myself clarifying every day. On Facebook, Twitter, people's blogs, sometimes on online news stories, news articles, and that kind of thing, because it can tend to go sideways, and it can create stories that become such misinformation that whole concept of the public's right to know, it just really corrupts it, in my opinion. And listen, God bless America and God bless free speech. That's, I'll defend that from now till the cows come home. But I think it's really important for the average and not so average news consumer to really be aware of what these issues are. Do a little bit of homework, just a little bit, and find out what they are. Because otherwise, you might really believe heart and soul what the Sierra Madre Tatler is saying about Ann Erdman and the expose that, he did of me. So, it was hot. I would just say buyer beware.
Do you mind if I piggyback on that? So one of the things I thought might be kind of fun to talk about, and this sort of follows along the idea of social media, is did everyone hear about the dress? Does everyone know about the dress, right? So you don't really think about that being, something connected with citizen journalism. But when you think about how many people that story reached, and I pulled up some statistics about it. It was actually just 8 posts, and they had a combined 41 million views according to BuzzFeed. It actually said the original had 28 million votes on it on BuzzFeed, and then it had been read from every country in the world in 5 languages. It says 5 language couches over texts, all driven by mobile and the ability to show your phone to different the different colors. So people were mixed about this. This was a very big debate over a dress. And I don't know if anybody caught it, actually was 11,000 tweets per minute. It ended up at the very that it ended up on Ellen, right? And they actually had the family this was all connected to tell the story on Ellen and show the dress and everything. So the reach of just this small little issue, this debate, and the way that it traveled and the information that it could provide, and then you think about that, and you think about things like the fact that there was just now recently a shooting in LA in Skid Row. That post on Facebook got 5 million views. Very quickly, over a short period of time, we're able to put this information out and have people consume that information. And what Anne was mentioning with this idea that, buyer beware, you do have to be very cautious about what you're putting out there, knowing that it has that far reach. But also there's power in that. There's power in the ability to be a citizen journalist, put something out over the internet and social media, and get your story told. And while we can think that the dress is sort of a fun, insignificant, crazy thing that everybody was talking about over the water cooler, right, during their office, but it also has that power and that other story that really needed to be told about what happened in LA and at Skid Row. It reached people too, and it formed opinions as well. And that's the power that we now have with the thing that we all actually turned off at this point, but with our phones. We have the ability to be citizen journalists with that small little device. And I think that's important for us to talk about a little bit. And it looked like somebody else actually wanted to comment on the dress as well.
I may be the only one in the room, but I have not read or heard about it.
I really want to comment by show of hands.
I want to hand it to Noelia. I'm sure.
I saw it and then just completely ignored, and then it took on a life of its own, and I'm very, very disappointed about that because I think it's a new low. As opposed to a new low cut. So, but You made a point, you said about this dress, 11,000 tweets in a minute or whatever it was. I'm just so saddened by that because this 2 days ago, the city of Los Angeles had its elections and city council members were voted in on less than 6,000 votes. And exactly, and you talk about, almost 4.5 million people. And you talk about power, I'm actually, gives me chills as I'm talking about this, you talk about power. I think people are so busy tweeting about the dress that they forgot to go vote. And you give away the real power, which is people are going to have decision-making power over their lives for the next 4 years. And we were too busy looking at a dress to really pay attention to something that matters. So I think yes, I agree with everything everybody's said here, but what this organization is all about is voting. That's the most powerful thing that you can do. And people in other parts of the world die for that right, and yet we're just relinquishing that right because we're so busy tweeting about dresses and games and football players. Yes.
I'd also like to say that the power of video or images is much greater in a sense than the power of text or words. That what happened in Skid Row not that many people would have read an article if it was simply an article about it. They would not have read it. The fact that there was video to watch, just like Rodney King, all this video is what will make things go, quote, viral. So that's important too. And so, but the good thing is that we all do have phones, and a lot more, bad events and people acting, and officials and so forth acting poorly is being caught, on our phones and being made more available.
I just have a point on what Noelia said, and it was shocking to me. But here's some good news. Just an example, what we can do in the press, and again, it's not my job to get everybody out to vote. My job, I feel like, is public service, though, to let you know what's going on. And here's an example where, and I think what sometimes can happen is there's a story that's pegged to a council member, and everybody gets so mad or so upset about it, they may come out and vote against that council member or for that council member. Maybe it's an issue. Here's an example very quickly from a story I did at SoCal Connected on Compton City Hall. Talk about a fight over public records. They broke every law. I had lawyers involved. They just didn't care. And I know why. It was a story about corruption at Compton City Hall. And a dirty deal essentially involving a developer, and there was this big hot record that I had to get, and I ended up making the story about how they wouldn't give me this document. And I did it with Laurel Erickson, if you get a chance. It's really, really funny because I put her on the phone with Compton City Hall for an hour and a half trying to get this record. We eventually got it, and we made that part of this story. What I found was that these city council members were getting paid to attend meetings that lasted 1 minute. They were being paid for meetings that never happened. It was a huge investigation we did. We won an Emmy for it, but more importantly, the story aired a week or two before the Compton City elections. And my feeling was, the story airs when it's ready. We're not holding the story until after the elections, unless there's a good reason. But the story was ready, and it's going to air when it's going to air. The amount of voters that turned out doubled. They went from 5,000, and talk about sad numbers. They had only had, I think, 4,000 people vote in the previous election, but they went up to almost 10. And many of the citizen activists credited my story for that. I don't know if that's the case, but they literally doubled it. Some of the people I profiled, the mayor was removed. Many people, I know my story went viral in Compton. So sometimes the power of the media, we can play a really big role, but it's getting almost an emotional story where people get so angry about something, they're so passionate, that gets them to the voting booth. And unfortunately, we just didn't have a lot of that this year, and there's just not that good of reporting, I'll just say it. I mean, the school board race, you're in charge of the largest school district in America. $7 billion budget, something outrageous like that, and some of them were decided within 100 votes. And so we have to do a better job, I think, of doing stories on our elected officials. They're not going to like that.
Another enemy of citizen involvement is complexity and how boring things are. I know, and there's a lot of that in city government. And so it turns people off. And part of the reason why the dress goes viral is easy to understand. We like it, we don't. Simple. People like things that they can get quickly. That's why you'll have complex Middle East talks going on, or wars in places that we don't quite understand. But if you talk about something simple, it'll, people will gravitate toward it. There was a great commentary, I think it was by Colbert, or was it Jon Stewart? Basically saying, I think it was, if you want to, it was on net neutrality. And it's the only reason I think why people are actually involved in net neutrality is because John Oliver did a fantastic explanation of net neutrality. And it took, 10, 15 minutes. But one of the things he said along the way is, if you want to get something important passed in your corporation or some special interest, cloak it in boring language. And people will just cloak it in long, technical, boring language. Net neutrality is one of those terms. Like, huh? So this is another enemy of citizen involvement, and that's why I have to hand it. And it does. You need a brain sometimes to look through some of these and understand what the hell is going on. It's inside government, and all this kind of stuff is very, very technical.
I have a comment about net neutrality. So I also serve on a national board of directors of an organization called the Alliance for Community Media. I've been a part of that organization for not for decades, but quite a while too. I think that's fine. And I served as the board chair of that organization for 2 years. And the net neutrality issue was a huge issue for our access stations and for our constituents. And what was interesting to me is to have people, contact me and say, what is this net neutrality thing? You thought it was out there everywhere and it was this kind of buzzword that everybody would connect with, but really it was one of those things that people were like, is it good, is it bad? I don't understand. And so we knew as a national organization that we needed to help champion this issue, which is fair and equal access to the internet for all. And as you can tell, it really was that kind of topic that once it hit what I would consider mainstream media or cable news, people started to talk about it. But really, it was citizens deciding that it was an important topic.
And understanding it.
Right, and deciding that, yeah, this is important to me, I'm going to connect with this, and I'm going to make sure that I have a vote. And we were talking a little bit about the power of those sort of small things that happen through social media, but also this low voter turnout. And when I think about the League of Women Voters, and I think about the connections that we've had in Pasadena covering events, trying to make sure that people are getting out and voting this next Tuesday, which is, it's going to be our mayor for the next 4 years. It's the first time that we have a mayor. We've had a mayor for quite some time. Is it 4 terms? Since 1999. And it's an important issue. And we as a community access station said, that's the most important thing. We're not concerned about who you vote for. It's about voting. And it'd be interesting to get everyone's opinion about how do we change the technology in a way that connects people to voting more. Is it that people voting just don't want to? It's an outdated, it's a hassle, it's a policy, maybe it's even boring to have to go through these pamphlets, and how do we connect in a way? We decided to do candidate video statements to try and connect and cover every possible debate or panel discussion that we could to get the word out, and we put it not only on our channel but on the internet. But it's an interesting question, especially to the people on this panel, what would your recommendation be? How do we connect people to vote more? And
That's actually kind of a different topic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, it is, that's I'm sure something that the league deals with a lot in terms of citizen involvement.
Microphone.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, citizen involvement, how to get people to vote, that is certainly a really important topic. I wanted to keep a little bit on investigative journalism and its impact, because there's no question that if you get people involved and if they care about something, they will turn out, like in Compton. And so I wanted to have Noelia also speak. The other, and then we'll open up the questions in about 10 minutes to you, because I know you have a lot of them. But yes, any other experience with investigative journalists and the impact they've made for better or for worse?
Absolutely. I actually think as a spokesperson investigative journalists, certainly when we had, when we had more reporters who were doing this and you didn't have to rely on, the community citizens only, you had other access to resources. I think that they made me a better public information officer, because I was always thinking about what are they interested in. And that would inform me in working with my fellow deputy mayors on how we were going to put out information, when, how, the depth of it, the complexity of it, what are the core issues, because it just really helped me kind of play the chess game a little bit better, thinking about, I want to make it as complete as possible so that we're not having this back and forth situation. And then, because when you have that, then somebody starts to develop the attitude, well, what are they hiding if I have to keep asking for it? And whereas if you make it as complete as possible, and again, as I said earlier, they have a job to do, so help facilitate their job so that it makes your job easier in the long run. And frankly, you're representing your principal in a far better fashion that way, because you are providing as complete as possible access to the information. So I actually thought that they made me a better press person.
Well, I have a question for you and for Ann. I mean, have you seen a difference in the time, decades or two you've been in your positions in terms of transparency, in terms of access? Has it gotten tougher for reporters or easier? What are your feelings on that in terms of the role of government?
Well, go ahead.
I think it really depends on the agency. At the city of Pasadena, I was there for 21 years as the PIO, and I was constantly counseling department directors and division managers and others, and the city clerk's office, and even the city attorney's office from time to time, about the California Public Records Act and how that works, and about truly the importance of getting out ahead of an issue and making information available, whether that meant reaching out to a reporter at the Pasadena Star-News or the LA Times or whatever, or the Pasadena Weekly, or whether that meant the city of Pasadena itself getting out ahead and providing information. That didn't always work when I tried, but most of the time it did. There were plenty, believe me, plenty of people in departments as well as even higher up who really went kicking and screaming from time to time when it came to providing public records, when it came to talking with a reporter or reporters about a particular issue. My role as the PIO was to counsel them and put them through the paces, prepare them for interviews, explain to them what the law is, explain to them about, as I said before, that balancing of the law of the California Public Records Act exemptions and the public's right to know. And so it really is a delicate balance, but I really do believe that it is the responsibility of the PIO to provide that kind of counsel, to stay ahead of those issues, anticipate the kinds of questions that reporters and constituents are going to ask, and help people be prepared with the responses to those questions. Not every department director, not every city manager, not every mayor in this world is comfortable, A, talking to reporters and being interviewed, and B, comfortable with the idea of providing that public document that really honestly is a public document. When it just feels better not to provide it, you know. So that's where PIOs come into the mix.
And also, I'd like Karen to address some bad investigative reporting, what you call sort of ambush or cheap shots, or you get like Channel 4, where they were trying to find the guys who were working for some utility, and
Okay, I can't comment because I work with all those reporters.
But there is some cheap shot investigative
There are.
reporting.
Without naming names,
Yeah.
I'd love to know if Noelia has any comment on what Ann said, and I am curious if you've had internal debates about, should we really release this? Do we have to release this? I mean, those conversations, have they happened? you know, us reporters sometimes think, oh, they must be in there plotting on how to get us information. But if you have, are there internal debates, maybe not with you, where you've had to explain to folks, you know what, we really do have to provide this?
Excuse me, I suddenly have a scratchy throat, pardon me. Not anything recently, fortunately our CEO, he completely gets it, so if anything is coming up, you know, we'll have a conversation and he knows we have to put this out. We better scramble inside, and maybe scramble's not the right word, but if we don't have the full information, we better get the full information so that we put it out. Excuse me. I had a situation a couple of days ago where a reporter called from somewhere in Pasadena and had questions about something, and it wasn't even anything serious, it was just informational. And our media person wasn't able to get a hold of the executive in charge of that topic and waited. And instead of saying, you know, let's go another route and figure it out and get the answer and get it out. So by the time we got to the reporter, I mean, that story was filed already and posted, and so we were playing catch up. Again, it wasn't a big deal story, but it still was an example of really, this is 2015 and we're talking about Media 101. So we had a very lovely conversation about that experience yesterday afternoon in my office, and that will be happening again soon. But the point is, I don't think anybody was malicious. I think they were just trying to be respectful of people's schedules, and, you know, again, it wasn't an end-all, be-all topic of the story. But yes, there were times, you know, I'll give you a classic example. In 1995, we had just gone to, with the mayor, we had a delegation that had gone to Asia for an economic trade mission. And this was in October. We left on a Saturday, rather than Friday. We get to Tokyo on Saturday night. On Sunday morning, Judge Ito, who was presiding judge over the O.J. Simpson trial, called the mayor and said, the jury has reached a verdict. You have to get back in town because we're going to release it tomorrow morning. So we had to get back on the next flight and come back to Los Angeles and literally go from LAX to the Emergency Operations Center. We had a press conference that was scheduled for, I don't remember the time, let's say it was 10 o'clock, and we got to the EOC at maybe 9:45, and everybody was like, we have to go out to the microphones. And I said, no, we don't, until we know what we're going to say. So fortunately, I had a 27-hour flight on the way back from Asia, and so I had, you know, mapped out the guilty or not guilty response from the mayor, depending on what the answer was going to be. And so, of course, we didn't know until the verdict was read. So we literally took maybe 7 minutes. It wasn't 10, I remember that. And I found a broom closet in the EOC, which was crammed with every, you know, law enforcement officer, city department head, preparing for a tactical alert. And I took the mayor, the police chief, and the acting mayor, who had, Joel Wax at the time was mayor pro tem. We went into literally a broom closet to rehearse what we were going to say, because we just had heard the verdict. And then we went upstairs. But the inclination was, let's go out and we'll just say whatever. No, we're not going to go out and just say whatever. We have to be prepared because we owe it to the people of Los Angeles to be responsible. We owe it to we knew at that point that the verdict was not guilty. And so we owed it to the law enforcement community to defend our police officers, because we couldn't say they got the wrong guy. We had to still stand behind them and say, you know, we believe justice has played its part and we respect the decision. We never said we're going to go out and look for the real killer. We really had to, you know, we had to be respectful to all of our constituents, the public, the law enforcement, police officers, and of course the jury themselves. And I don't care how busy we are, there's always time to take a couple of minutes to get it right, because you don't have a chance to do it again and get it right the second time. It just doesn't happen.
I've been asked to interrupt just a bit, and then right after this, it'll be a good chance to go to your questions for an announcement from the lunch committee.
Thank you so much. I just need to get a final count. Raise your hand if you're here. Beth Carlton?
If you're here. Beth?
Leela? So you can, I'll talk to you later, but I've got you down for lunch. Phyllis Chambers? Anita Davis? Okay. And then afterwards, Uni, Marguerite, Marcia, and Isabel, if you want lunch, raise your hand.
Uni's here.
Just come over and see me if you want.
Which Marcia?
Marcia Balderswold. Okay, so I'll order lunch for you.
Just back there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sorry.
All set? Okay,
Sorry.
great. Okay, good time to turn it to your questions. I'm sure you've been itching to ask what one of our great panelists, different aspects of their job or their challenges. Write them down.
And then we'll bring them up.
Oh, very good. So you need to write down your questions and somebody bring them. Are there any questions currently written down that we can start with? I guess you have to write them down. There we are. Excellent. Okay. Regarding having to pay for documents, is this an attempt to discourage public access, or is it more of a way to increase the agency's revenue, or both? And here's a chance to also tell the story about Sacramento.
Oh, yeah.
Paying for documents.
Yeah, I think it depends on the agency, but I think it's sometimes both, you know. With the CHP, I mean, that's ridiculous, because it's not that I'm having them go and find these records and make copies of them. They're sitting there. They've already given it to another reporter, and under the California Public Records Act, any of you can go in and say, I know the records you just gave Val, I want the same set. And you don't have to go through the same hoops and everything that Val, so you could potentially go to City Hall today, Pasadena, and say, give me everything you gave to Pasadena City or Star News. And they don't have to charge you, it's already been made. A lot of people don't know that. It's a quick way to get records. So in that case, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak for them. I will tell you that Jerry Brown passed a law, I think it was last year, that put a lot of the cost of public records on these local agencies. And so I think that that's why in the past year, we've seen this just huge ramp up of trying to charge us for everything. What I have to do is I have to get on the phone and I have to argue with them and say, I want a breakdown of why I'm being charged $40 an hour for Susan to go over here and there. And I will share this with you. I was telling Val and Wellia this off. It was a very disturbing conversation I had recently. I was trying to get records on an elected official, and I called a source who was also an elected official, and I said, gosh, you know, I think I'm getting ready. I know they're going to fight me on this. I know these are public records, aren't they? And she said, they are, but you're not going to get them, and I'll tell you why, because our legal advisor and this group of elected officials said, we know these are public records. We know we have to give them, but we're not going to give them, because we know that the reporters don't have the money or the time to hire lawyers to fight us. So we know that these are public records, and we know we should give them under the law, but we're not going to, because we're assuming, because, and this was the quote, I think, was that most media organizations have gotten rid of legal counsel. So they don't have the muscle to fight us. And if they fight us, we'll fight them for months and months, and it will cost them thousands. So this is what we are facing now. This is an elected official who frankly felt terrible about it, but said, and you know what the records I wanted? Their calendars and their agendas. I wanted to know what this particular person has been doing with his time, and I'm not going to get it unless I hire a lawyer. You know, and the reality is, KPCC, Al Jazeera, we do have attorneys. Many times they are not First Amendment attorneys, they're contract attorneys. This is a very specialized kind of law. And thank God for Peter Scheer at the First Amendment Coalition, because he has personally taken on one of the cases at SoCal Connected and won through the Sheriff's Department. But this is no joke. I mean, that's why I asked you, I know that some agencies plot to figure out ways not to give me material. They'll try to charge me. They'll stall. They won't answer you. Or they'll say another 14 days, another 14 days. And that's when you really need to get a lawyer involved. And there are a few who are taking cases. The backstory is when a lawyer sues the Sheriff's Department, they can actually, if they win, they get all their legal fees. So sometimes there's an incentive for that, many times. So yeah, it's in terms of charging, I've really seen a big problem with that recently. And again, they can waive the fees under the Act. Right. They absolutely can waive these fees. But an argument I had earlier this week with Kalusha, you know, I mean, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I have to send a check in, and they're right there. And I think it's probably, I mean, I don't know. It's part of it is trying to recoup the costs, because so many of these agencies have had their budgets stripped. But what a shame, you know, to take it out on the reporters that it does happen. And the reality is, many of us don't have the budget to pay $5,000 for records, or even $100 for records. But that's the way it is now, so.
Because I have more questions.
Let's see, how do we interest the Latino, Asian communities, et cetera, who have in something different social media? How important are they to today's, I think it's diversity, but this is a good question. We live, it's hard enough for us to keep in touch and so forth, and then we live in a very fragmented, culturally fragmented world, and it's yet another barrier for everybody getting informed and even voting. Any ideas there?
Well, I know with our agency, we have 2 blogs. One is called The Source, and it's on metro.net, and it's obviously in English, but we also have one in Spanish, and we've had one for quite a while. It's called El Pasajero, the passenger. And we have somebody who does that full time. And that's a way that we interact with the Spanish-speaking community through social media. But for example, I was talking about earlier the release of the study tomorrow. That will be in various languages. So we want to make it as accessible as possible. But this is not new. 20 years ago, before I got into politics, I worked for Southern California Edison in the corporate communications department, and I created the first ever diversity PR campaign because I'd like to think we were so altruistic, and in some parts we were. But really it was a business decision because we had a lot of new customers who were coming in from all over the world who had maybe never had access to reliable electricity, didn't know how to use it safely, don't stand in water while you're blow drying your hair. But other on the business side, we would have people who would leave their residences and not close out their bill. So we would lose money because they didn't know the process. And so we created a PR campaign to educate them on this is how to be an Edison customer. Those are very basic things, and I think we all can do that in our organizations, whether we're public information officers or just your own mom and pop business. There's a diverse community out there, and it's getting bigger, and more importantly, they have a lot of money to spend. And they're consumers just like everybody else, and if you can find a way to connect with them in a meaningful way, and if we can find a way to get our information out to them as public information officers, it makes them better consumers, and it makes us a better organization for including them in the conversation.
Anyone else want to address diversity issues? If not, there's plenty of other questions I can go to. So. Here's one. I am busy. I can't spend all day tracking down information. I relied on the press to be my filter. Am I a dinosaur? To rely on the press. Any advice for someone who simply doesn't have time to track down, independent information or verify? I mean, my advice is go to reliable sources. I mean, in the end, it's going to be, New York Times is still superb. There's a lot of really reliable stuff out there. The trouble is, if you want to be very, very local, there's hopefully, on a local basis in Pasadena probably has some very good reporters. Yes, I don't know, but you're probably, I hope, maybe a little bit more in touch with them to call them on the carpet. If there are not some thoughts here for.
No, you're not a dinosaur. You're like 99% of the people in the city, a lot about, in this area, but don't complain when all the billboards are up and all the pop clinics are up and the FEMA floods, because the reality is there are very few of us reporters. There's very few. Remember, there's like 2 City Hall reporters in LA. So that's just the reality that we need your help. There are not many of us.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, and you're not a dinosaur. You're not going to be as informed, and it's important to be informed. And I wish that I could come up with, a great news source. I want to give a pitch to the fact that we actually have our own local news program that a community producer, Tammy Devine, has actually put together called Crown City News CCN Sunrise, that actually airs live on Friday mornings, and we put it available online, and that's a good source for local information as well. And I would feel like Ann would have some good resources for this as well. But that's my pitch for local news. We have a producer that's very vigilant about trying to report everything that's happening in the Pasadena area.
Well, one of the things that I love about the media landscape in Pasadena in the last few years is that in addition to the traditional, let's say, news sources such as the Pasadena Star News and the Pasadena Weekly and whatnot, Now there are local, online only, digital only news sites. Pasadena Now is a kind of a combination of news releases that people send out and they post them, which I really appreciate now in retirement that I have some clients. And so I appreciate that. But also from time to time, James McPherson either will write something up himself about an issue or hire a stringer to write an article about a particular issue or maybe do an interview. So that's really important to the landscape. Another couple of examples are the Hometown Pasadena site. There's also a relatively new site that's been around for a year or so called Colorado Boulevard that some of you may or may not be familiar with. And the interesting thing also about the traditional media, not only locally but also regionally and nationally, is that of course in this day and age every traditional news source has really been forced to, I shouldn't say forced, but really has seen the opportunity to provide online content and interactive online content so that people have a choice. Not everybody wants to wait until tomorrow morning's paper comes out and lands in the driveway to find out what today's news is. Most people are going to go to an online news source using a number of different kinds of platforms, whether it's their cell phone or their tablet or their laptop or their PC or whatever it is, their Magic 8 Ball, you know, you just never know. But there really is a wealth of opportunities out there to get legitimate news, hard news about particular issues. Are you a dinosaur, whoever asked that question? I wouldn't go that far. Because I would never say that you're on the verge of becoming extinct. However, I believe that that's really a choice. And that's okay with me. Not everybody has to be or wants to be tied to some kind of digital device. So that's okay with me. You have my permission.
The only times to be happy to continue your subscription.
The question for Carrie, what percentage of your programming is for city and city personnel and officials and so forth, I guess, and what percentage for the community?
So there is an entire channel dedicated towards there are two channels. One is KPAS, which is the government access channel. So 100% of KPAS is dedicated towards covering the events that happen in Pasadena and specific to the city itself. And then the Arroyo channel is actually the public access channel that is 100% for the community. So that was an easy answer, or easy question with an easy answer.
For those of us who want to become citizen journalists, where would you recommend we look for stories or find stories? I know that reporters get stories from citizen journalists who do the research first. That's why she's interested. So where do you look for stories if you're interested in being a citizen journalist?
I think it'd be interesting for you where you look for your stories.
Sure, you know, a lot of my stories just come from, you know, I'm a resident of LA and fourth generation LA resident. So a lot of them, as Val would say, friends tell me things. I mean, the sidewalk expose way before the LA Times, where they ripped me off, everything. I was walking down the sidewalks, this was 2011, I said, God, why are the sidewalks such a mess? And off I go to find out that there was a $100 million screw up at City Hall, and there we go. But a lot of them I get from my own experience. I wondered where I live, why aren't there any more parks?
The FEMA story.
The FEMA story.
You
Well,
have
that's
one story
well.
that you
I
got.
start off on the parks. If you remember, why is city so few parks? You know, I had little kids at the time. They were, I don't know, 3 and 5, and you know, it was always getting in the car. We had to drive to the park. Whereas when I lived in Manhattan Beach or Redondo, I could walk to 5 parks. You know, and so lo and behold, in the course of doing that story, I found my FEMA floods. But we were visited parks. And do you remember what we found? We found $114 million sitting in a fund at City Hall to this day, I think it's still there, meant for parks. In an investigation we did it, I found there were all these loopholes and strings attached to this money that at the end of the day, there were pools that are empty in South LA, have been empty for 5-6 years. These kids need a pool. They can't, if they walk across town, they can get shot because they're walking into gang territory. Remember, we profiled that. And the worst part of that was there's $114 million sitting in a fund. That story just came from me because I wondered why there weren't any parks. So my idea is to talk to your friends, and you know, you've got great ideas. Your life experience counts, and you know, it just a little be inquisitive.
The key word there is why. These are just experiences that we have every day. Why is this question? Why are we doing it this way? Why is it like that? Why can't that get fixed? Why is that happening there and not happening here? Why? And just use your own curiosity about your own experience, and it'll be great. And of course, there are people who call and give tips and so forth. But you know, it also goes to when you do start asking why, be prepared for very complicated answers. Because there is, you know, the parks thing, the massage parlors, oh my God, why are there some massage parlors popping up? I know that at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock with the neon light on, that not that many people want a massage at 11 o'clock p.m., and you have a lot of them in Pasadena, by the way, is because a change in the law and how they were regulated up in Sacramento had this ripple effect, allowing a lot of them to be open without any local control. That's the bottom line. So, and with the, exactly, and with the parks money, okay, the parks money is sitting there, but of course, it was from a law in Sacramento, and you can only use the money that is garnered from developers who develop there. You have to use the money within whatever, a half-a-mile radius of this, and blah, 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 and that's why where there's more development money, there's more money that goes to the park funds, but the park funds can only be used where there's more development, and so there's not development in poor areas, so therefore they don't need parks. It just drives you crazy when you do get the answers, so be prepared for that.
It's a long road you're gonna go.
It's a long road, it's a long road. Okay, regarding Pasadena mayor race, the embezzlement issue should get people to vote. More information and facts are coming out every day. Is the media waiting until the March 10th elections after to bring up the facts to residents? Regarding getting people to vote, especially in Pasadena mayor's race, unfortunately or fortunately, this embezzlement issue hopefully will. I think she's saying, he or she is saying it will. We need a Pasadena voice here to talk about, to elaborate a little bit on this embezzlement issue.
And do you mind, I didn't quite,
I'm trying to read it too.
Pass it down.
I think the bottom line is the embezzlement issue should get people to vote, right?
And are they waiting until after the election? Are reporters holding this
More information
or
and
the
facts
city?
coming out every day. Is the media waiting until the March 10th elections till after? Is the media waiting till after the March 10th election to bring up the facts to residents?
well,
Isn't it already out?
I think the media, the local media especially, has been very diligent in covering this embezzlement. I mean, I'm a little confused by the question because I don't think the media is holding out in any way whatsoever in reporting on the embezzlement. So I think unless somebody lives in a cave, then everybody in town is aware in some way, shape, or form of this embezzlement issue. The one burning issue right now is, which I think may have come out from the lawsuit filed on behalf of Mr. Lamaco, that calls for the courts to postpone the election. In my not so humble opinion, and listen, I'm not an attorney, I think that's pretty flimsy, but that all of that rests, that lawsuit rests on the allegation that the city of Pasadena did not release the KPMG forensic investigative audit of that undergrounding of utilities account until the DA made its arrests. Had that investigative report, which is considered exempt through the California Public, was at the time considered exempt through the California Public Records Act because it was ongoing and it was investigatory and part of the continuum of the LA District Attorney's Office effort to really have an ironclad case against Mr. Wooten and the others. Had that been released in advance of those arrests, then it would have potentially given Mr. Wooten an opportunity to flee. It could potentially have given Mr. Wooten an opportunity to try and influence other people, perhaps on staff at the city of Pasadena, who knows, about potential testimony regarding that. So at the same day that Mr. Wooten and the others were arrested, that same day that report was released. As soon as they were in custody, that report was released. So, yeah, again, I'm not sure what spurs that question, but all of that information is out there. Now, so bottom line for me, if someone doesn't go to the polls or doesn't do an absentee ballot or whatever they're signed up for, that's a choice. That's a choice that people make. You don't want to go to the polls, you don't want to vote, good for you. Whatever. But don't come crying to me.
Here's a question.
When conflicting information is received from multiple sources, how are you able to arrive at what is accurate or truthful? And how can you, or do you, hold the sources accountable when there's conflicting information?
Well, you know what, I mean, hopefully I have somebody like Noelia or Ann that I can go to the agency and say, look, I heard the chairman of Metro is embezzling money to his church. I'm also hearing that it wasn't him, that it was his secretary, and she's sending it to her LLC in Singapore. And when you have that, hopefully you talked a little bit of it, and this relationship is very special. You know, if you can have that with a public information officer or somebody who's in the agency you truly trust, who's not going to throw you off, who's going to say, look, off the record, it's actually the chairman, you know, or you're going in the right direction. And I would do that. I mean, and that's one way where we talked about that. Unfortunately, those relationships they don't exist as much anymore, and they take so much time. And there's really a faith for you to trust me that I'm not going to burn you, and likewise. And you really go by your gut, I think. I got a good spidey sense for that. But the other thing is when you have conflicting information, I had a piece last night on Al Jazeera on the website that I broke on the superbug, and more links to the scopes. And with something like that where you have conflicting information, I mean, I always have to have a document, basically, but even in that case, and this might be kind of interesting to you and Ann, I don't know if this has happened to you, but it was a story, I was tipped off that there was another superbug outbreak in Wisconsin that made a bunch of people sick, and I called Monday and I said, look, you know, I know this happened, was it linked to these scopes? And so they got back to me yesterday and they said, yeah, and we've had to, you know, it's the whole scope thing again. But the PIO, I said, well, did you report that to the FDA that you had dirty scopes? No, we didn't tell anybody. And I said, really, you didn't report this to the feds? She goes, we're not required to. And I said, gosh. I said, can you double check? I got this feeling she didn't know what she was talking about. And I really was trying to give her cover. And I said, you know what? I know you may not know, and I know, can you just check with your higher ups? And she refused and refused. I said, okay, then I'm reporting that the Department of Health Services in Wisconsin never told anybody about this. That's what I'm going with. I had repeated conversation. So that's what I posted. Guess what I got this morning? An email from her saying, you know what, I misspoke. I checked with somebody high up. In fact, we had reported this. It's never been. So we're having to change the story as I speak. Not my correction. I gave her, and I actually went behind her, which I don't like to do, but I tried to get a hold of the person most knowledgeable. I got their voicemail, and they were out of town, and she should have gone up the flagpole. So I had conflicting information, I reported it and attributed it to her, and now who's got egg on their face, you know?
That's a great example, and you know, and we're not, I don't think we're saying we wish for the good old days, that's not what we're saying. But I think there are some things that are just common golden rule philosophies that will help all of us in our work. When, you know, Rick Orloff, who was an institution in Los Angeles at City Hall, he was a reporter for the Daily News, and I'm sure with the Pasadena Star News you saw a lot of his stories. He was like my Lou Grant when I went to work at City Hall. I always wanted to be Mary Richard when I grew up, and when I went to City Hall, there was Lou Grant, you know? So his philosophy was very simple. Always tell me the truth, always return my phone calls, and never bug me at my deadline. So, and I always respected that, and he was golden to me. And from the very beginning, I mean, you know, I think you make the point about you have this instinct, great chemistry and relationships, where you have these background conversations with reporters, and you know who you can trust, and you really know when one of them burned you, and then you never trust them again. But the reverse is also true. You know, I would share information, but he would call me, or other reporters, Jim Newton, same way from the LA Times, because he covered Los Angeles, the mayor when I was at City Hall. They would call me and say, here, this is what we're hearing. You know, what can you tell me? And if I could tell him something, I would. If I couldn't tell him something, I would also say, I can't tell you that, which would be code for you're on the right path. So go ahead and, you know, but if I would say to him, you know, that's wrong, you might want to search another way. So it's a two-way street, and I really miss those days. I think, again, it's the cutbacks and the economy and not having enough reporters on these different beats.
And not to laugh, oh yes, go ahead. Sure.
Well, I was thinking, I would say that if you have two conflicting stories or several conflicting stories and you're trying to figure out what's the truth in that story, that you have the opportunity to go to experts. You can't just reach out to experts of whatever that opinion is and go make, and it can be some work, but if you're really interested in figuring out, okay, somebody once told me the truth is somewhere in the middle, and you think, well, I kind of want to find out what the truth is.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's good to, if it's a story about, anything that you feel passionate about or connected to, find an expert, find a doctor that about health questions. We can still go to actual people and ask those questions. And I think sometimes also, getting your questions out and saying, I really have interest in this topic, I want to learn more about it. And sometimes you do have to go to multiple sources, multiple venues, not just find a newspaper article or a couple of articles, or go on the internet. You can ask people about it and have that kind of conversation so that you can come up and form your own decision. I don't know if you can look at I'm extremely impressed with the fact that Karen went to all of that effort to make sure that she's telling the accurate story, and that those kind of ethics in journalism are really, really important. But you can't guarantee that every story you read is going to be like that, and so it's really important to be proactive about getting the information, even if it's not from a reporter, it's from an actual expert in the field.
I mean, people make mistakes, and so if I put on Noelia and I'm assuming she's got the story, but maybe she made a mistake, so I tend to just try to make sure, especially with my instinct, I was like, oh, I don't think I just had this feeling, and I gave her so many opportunities, and she was a lovely person, but, it was, I think you did the right thing.
Oh, somebody said, is she still?
Yeah, I think what this is interesting, and this is sort of a mega trends sort of viewpoint. One is reporting is becoming, in a way, easier because the data out there is massive. And there are now people called data journalists who don't go out to City Hall, who basically sit in front of a computer and are ingenious, and I consider them ingenious because I'm not at their level, and they can get into databases of, I'm not talking about hacking, just seeing an incredible amount of public information about health, about finances, about demographics, about education. And they will find stories from reports and everything that's online that you and I would never be able to find. And they are really whizzes at this. and they can come up with incredible stories. Heart attacks in this community, this zip code does that, da, 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 da. And now with so much information online, including a lot of government agencies, there's a lot of really fantastic data journalism. At the same time, I'm also hearing the lack of human relationships and contact, and nothing like picking up the phone, hearing the voice that tells you, my instincts are telling me this person is not really on it. So you've got data journalism, and I think the best journalism comes when you get the data journalism mixed with picking up the phone, even if you can't go down and have drinks or a relationship. You know, it used to be, in the old days, it was always the bars that the reporters hung out with the cops. But at least, you know, if you can't have human face-to-face contact, at least pick up the phone. And I totally agree. Nothing like picking up the phone, and I'm not so proud of, you know, or so, I should say, protective. I don't hold my card so close to my vest that I won't say to a, you know, DWP person, for example, recently, or actually it was NWD, I want to say this. Am I correct? I want to say that Los Angeles captures only 10% of all the rainfall. Is that correct? So, you know, a lot of it is help us here. Am I saying the right thing? And certainly when the stakes are high in investigative journalism, that's all the more important. So data journalism is fantastic. It's just incredible what people can do now. Computer nerds can be journalists and uncover things that I could never uncover, but there's no substitute for human contact, voice-to-voice, face-to-face. So hopefully the two will mesh, and maybe there'll be backlash against all this digital stuff. I don't know. Another question. This is a very good one. As a producer and editor with limited human and financial resources, how do you decide what stories to investigate or report on? And that might be true also from a PIO point of view. Limited resources, what's the most important story to get out there? What do you spend your resources on in terms of giving information, and from a reporter's point of view in terms of deciding what stories to do? Who would like to tackle that?
Or limited resources. How do you decide? Limited resources.
I would offer that now the ability to tell a story, the resources are so inexpensive. I mean, you know, you can basically edit on your phone. If you have a smartphone, you can get the video, you can get the content. It's really probably this idea of access to the information and the cost associated with it. And you know, I know in our world we train people to come in, and they, you know, the fee for coming in and being a producer at our station is $50 a year. So, you know, and you're provided access to cameras and equipment and edit systems. We make it as cost effective as we can possibly make it to teach you how to be able to edit and tell your story for our television channel. So I'm kind of thinking, well, you know, which story to tell in that part of the question, you know, I fall back to what are you most passionate about? What's most worth your time in terms of resources, and how do you want to spend your time? And what do you feel will be most effective to you to be able to tell this story? Does anybody else have anything you'd like to?
Well, Karen, I'm sure you've had situations where you've had to turn down a story because it just took too much to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an instinct. You pretty much know, even a 2 days, 3 days in, I kind of know if this is worth it, because it's like, oh, you know, you've got this big, long road ahead, fighting for this, fighting for that, trying to get her to talk, trying to get him to talk, fighting with him to get the record. So you really have to, you know, especially at SoCal Connected, where we had a very short season. So.
How about you answer that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we do. We have to decide all the time. We have basically top stories, which get 2 days of shooting, and features, which are a little lighter, get 1 day of shooting. That's the basic rule. So if somebody comes across a great story, but I know it's going to take 5 days of shooting, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to consider it. You know, we have to live within our budget. We have to produce 36 episodes for the season. I have to delay it. You know, it's reality. But fortunately, if you know how to shoot, and we have some very talented producers and reporters, you can actually shoot a lot in 2 days and come back and put together a pretty nice, you know, 5, 6, 7 minute story. But many times, we just reject it on the basis of how many resources it's going to take and how much shooting it's going to take. Also, just geography. You know, there are some great stories in Northern California, or even in the middle of Central Valley, or all the way up to San Luis Obispo. But sometimes, if you have a choice between a story that's good and it's, you know, 45-minute drive, or even out to the Inland Empire, you're probably going to choose that over one that's a 3-hour drive. So logistics and resources, yeah, it's just part of life, but we all make those choices in our daily life, yeah. Investigative stories, I think, Karen indicated, some sort of fall in your lap, and you've got your sources. If you've got your sources, the story is probably going to unfold. If you have to fight to even get your sources, it's an uphill battle. So that's a big fork in the road for investigative. Or do you have ready sources who are willing to talk, or don't you? That's probably the single biggest thing. Here's some other questions. It's just a kind of a big overall one. We're dealing with news holes that are shrinking. Media has been hammered by relentlessly for years, mostly by the right, mainstream media. There's fewer and fewer investigative reporters and reliable media outlets. Citizen journalists are not trained professionals and or can be dismissed. That's true. And sometimes they just run out of steam if you're a citizen journalist. So, bottom line is, what's to keep local government honest? It's a good, great, big question. So a great way to end. How do you keep local government honest?
Show up. No, you do have time to show up. Whether you do it in person, or you do it online, or you write whatever it takes. And if you can't do it, have somebody
Show up on voting day too.
Well, that's the number one place that you should show up, because you'd be surprised. We at Metro every month we have a board meeting, and there's always public comment. And as would be expected, it's the same people who are making the public comment. And I know the two of these people do not represent anybody in this room. And so it might be a schlep, but you can take the gold line down to Union Station and go and show up, and there's an item that you're interested in, even if there's not a specific item. If there's general comment, you just go, and there's always general comment period at the board meeting. Make your voice heard. And the same thing for everywhere else. I think that if nothing else, you are at least going to feel better that you expressed your opinion. And there's going to be somebody like me in the audience, or one of my community relations people, who are going to go to you and say, you know what, good, we'll answer that, or we'll get the information that you need, or we'll follow up, or whatever. I've seen it happen many times, not as much as I would like, because people just don't show up. As I mentioned earlier, the 710 North study is coming out tomorrow, and we'll be having 3 public hearings. Originally there was only 1, but there will be 3. Show up at that. Every comment, and you don't have to even show up. You can email or write old snail mail version, US mail, your comments or your opinions. Every single comment is going to be included in the final study report and evaluation. And so your voice is your power, and you need to use it. Don't let somebody else speak for you. That doesn't work.
And I frankly, I mentioned earlier that I don't know of any, what I really would consider citizen journalists in Pasadena. Some people do something once in a blue moon, but I don't know of any true citizen journalists. I would love it if somebody would either start a blog or a special Facebook page or whatever, Twitter account, and be able to say, you know what, I watched that council meeting on TV, or I went to that council meeting about this particular issue, and I heard the pros, and I heard the cons, and I heard the testimony on both sides. I heard what the city had to say, and here's my opinion now, based on all of that background. Here's what I learned from that meeting. And maybe provide a couple of links to information. I would love to see that.
Aren't you retired?
It's just, I have my own blog, but I'm retired now, so that's a whole different deal. But don't tempt me. It's just, for whatever reason in Pasadena, it's not part of that social media landscape. I mentioned, for example, the Sierra Madre Tatler, and there are a couple of others that are definitely our conspiracy theory, sites. And in fact, I told the person who goes by the pseudonym of Eric Maru, who manages or owns that Sierra Madre Tatler website, and when he did the expose on Ann Rippon, I said, I'm really flattered that you're so fascinated with me. But yeah, we really don't see that so much at all, at least in Pasadena. So any volunteers out there? Roberta, come on. I may have to do it myself, who knows, but.
I actually have seen somebody starting, and this could have been going on for a while, and it's just now caught my radar. Somebody's actually tweeting the city council meetings. They're actually doing like tweets of the city council meetings, which is kind of exciting.
But that's more play-by-play.
It's true, but it's nice to see somebody actually choosing to take, you know, Twitter and do that. I'm trying to think of a different angle to the answer to this question, and I think what we need to look at is how do you change. Let's anticipate that 90% of the people in government are trying to just come in and do a great job. They're doing their job. They're not trying to do anything to, you know, no invoice gate issues, and they're just trying to do their job. And still, even in doing that, you know, people can get off track and not really have the answers to information. And so it's important that accountability isn't just about, you know, trying to bulldog for any expose or big issue. It's about having that understanding and acknowledgement of government. And so I think when somebody says, you know, how with the resources dwindling, how do we keep our government in check? Well, we have to make it important to us, and it is. So how do we find ways to maybe change the system to say, there's got to be more transparency. I know there are big initiatives in terms of open data. You know, big data is now the big buzzword, right? Where there's like more data sets of information being able to be presented. I think it's also having community members say, you know, I'm going to make an effort to not only vote, but also to take a kind of regular check-in with my community, with my city council member, with my field rep, my city council member, and just, you know, and get that sort of information, that check-in. It's caused me to think about the idea that on the KPAS, you know, channel, maybe what we need to do is start doing a monthly show. We've talked about this, where we're talking about what's going on in the city, just informing community members about what's going on overall in the city. I know there's a city newsletter that's put out. There's Pasadena in Focus, which I think was Ann's. Did you start Pasadena in Focus, the newsletter?
I inherited it, but it was a bill stuffer when I first came.
Mm-hmm. So there's ways to get that kind of information, but then it's asking those deeper questions about what does this mean? What's going on with what's happening in the community? But it'd be interesting for us to continue the discussion about how do we change that with the dwindling resources, and how do we find ways to provide resources so that we're not concerned about, you know, only 2 reporters covering City Hall in LA and citizen journalists. So might be, you know, we might need a follow-up panel for this.
My thing is, you know, subscribe to KPCC, subscribe to the LA Times. I'm not joking. These are the agencies these are the news organizations, KCET. Because the reality is, you can have your blog in Pasadena, and you could be tweeting, but nobody sees you. It doesn't matter. You need this microphone from a KPCC, from a KCRW, from an LA Times, because nobody's going to see you otherwise. That's the reality. You can go to the meeting, you can be heard, but you know what? There's something to be said about the big media, and you know what? They need your support, honest to God. You know, they need people paying for this. If you want it, you have to pay for it.
Right, just real quickly, and I think, well, now, it's even, if you've read an article, it's easier now to get a hold of the reporter who wrote it, because their emails are always there, or their Twitter feeds or hashtags are always there. So you can get to them directly, and that, I would imagine, I'm not a journalist, helps them, you know, advocate for whatever resources they might need internally, because their articles are resonating with the public, and it helps them take that again to their boss, because they're trying to do a more complete job. So it's all connected.
And my final word is, yes, it's great to get the LA Times interested and get big headlines, but sometimes just your being there and watching your city council, and you've got friends, and the buzz in the community, positive or negative about a person on a council or a person on a board, can also have a big effect. So it doesn't always have to hit the big headlines, but when it's big enough, when it's really important enough, it will. And I know, I apologize, we can't get to all the questions. I know I've seen some hands go up, but I have to adhere to the time. I just want to thank our fabulous panelists, Greta, Karen, Carrie, and Ann. I think that if there's some questions you have, I'm sure that Greta will answer them, but we're going to hang around for a little bit, and I think someone will be able to join you for lunch. Thank you so much.